Hello everyone, I am Punyakirti BL. Welcome to the FastAPI for Generative AI series where we learn to build fast, scalable and production ready AI applications using FastAPI. Let's get started. So today's topic is before learning FastAPI for Generative AI, you must understand what APIs are. Let's start with introduction. So, introduction. Before we start learning Fast API, we first need to understand what an API is. Fast API is simply a framework for building APIs. If you don't understand APIs, learning Fast API will be much more difficult. Similarly, APIs are almost one of the most important concepts in generative AI because almost every AI application communicates with AI models through APIs. So, before writing our first fast API application, let's build a strong foundation. So, first question is why do we need APIs? Imagine you are building a food delivery app. So, building without APIs means do you need to create your own maps to show restaurant locations? Do we need to build your own payment system for online payments? Do you need to create your own SMS service to send OTPs? The answer is no, because building all these features yourself would take a lot of time, money and effort. So what is the solution for this? The solution is using APIs. Maps API, which is helps us to your website sends a request to get the required data related to maps. Then payment API or service and is helpful to get the details of payments and process the payment details. Then SMS service for handling OTPs. So in simple words, an API is a bridge that allows different applications to talk to each other and share data or services without knowing how the other application works internally. Now we got why do we need APIs. Next topic is let's understand this with a real world example, movie ticket booking. So imagine you are building a movie ticket booking website. So your website users should be able to search movies, view available seats, book tickets. So now think about the challenge. There are thousands of movie theaters across the world. How will your website know which movies are running, which seats are available, which shows are full, right? But calling every theater manually is impossible. The information changes every minute. To overcome this problem, so we can use API. How these APIs solve this problem? Instead of every developer contacting every theater, a company collects information from all movie theater. This is a centralized solution. What that company will do? It stores the data and keeps that data updated. Then creates an API, and through API gateway, they will provide a public API. Now, once the API is available, what the developer simplified workflow is, now developer simply request information from that API, and once they request, they will get the respective data. So through this API, what happens? This saves enormous time and effort. So we need to note that is many companies charge developers for using their APIs because maintaining this infrastructure requires significant resources. So now we are able to understand how APIs solve this problem, right? Let's understand how does an API work. Suppose user wants to see movies currently showing. So the first step is the client. The client, what happens? Client will be like browser from the desktop or laptop, mobile app in mobile. Okay, in the step one, the client sends a request. For example, get movies. In the step two, the API receives the request. Step 3, the API forwards it to the application server. In the step 4, the server queries the database. In step 5, the database returns the requested data. Step 7, the API sends the response back to the client. Then the client displays the required data which is received by the API. So this is how the API is working. We understand the complete flow. Next is how APIs allow programs to communicate. Let's understand applications communicate with each other through APIs. How, for example, your website communicates with a payment gateway to do all payment related transactions. Then your mobile app communicates with a banking server to get the details related to bank account or any banking data. Next, an AI chatbot communicates with an LLM to process the request or query from the user to connect with the LLM. So, what happens without APIs? Applications would not be able to exchange information in a standardized and secure way. Now, we understand how APIs allow programs to communicate. Next, we can understand this using Payment Gateway API. If suppose you are building an e-commerce website, instead of developing your own payment system, you integrate the payment provider's API. So, your website sends the payment details to the API through gateway payment provider, process the transaction and returns the result. This is much faster, more secure and avoids reinventing complex functionalities. So, we understood payment gateway API, right? Let's understand what is REST API. There are different types of APIs, but the most commonly used today is the REST API. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. REST is not a programming language or a framework. It is an architectural style for designing web APIs. REST APIs communicate over the HTTP protocol, which is the standard protocol by web browsers and web applications. So we understood what is REST API. Let's understand REST representation. When a client requests data, the database contains the complete internal record. However, the client usually receives only a representation of the data, not the actual database row. So, for example, the database may contain many internal fields such as audit information, internal IDs, or timestamps, but the API returns only the fields that are relevant to the client. So, if for example we are in our picture, we are able to see item name, price, stock level, but it contains in the database internal id audit info, right? But API returns only the fields that are relevant to the client. This controlled representation improves security, flexibility and consistency. So we understood REST representation, right? Let's go with next topic, API request. We already told client request and request, right? But how they will send? Every API request is made using a URL called an endpoint. Once this endpoint receives the request, it will transfer the call to the server. For examples, the endpoint examples is like retrieve all movies. If you want to retrieve all movies, use this endpoint called get movies. If you want to retrieve one movie, you can use the endpoint get movies Spider-Man. But how an API, how many endpoints, how we come to know it? Through the API documentation. Developers learn available endpoints by reading the API documentation provided by the API owner. This is how we can see. This is what about API request we learned. Next, we can see API responses. We know API request will be sent to the server, then server send the responses. That responses we can call it as API responses. Most modern APIs return data in JSON. So JSON is stands for JavaScript Object Notation because it is lightweight, readable and supported by almost every programming language. For example, response look like this. It contains four attributes like name, duration, release date, language. It contains respective values. Now you see this JSON format is there, right? The front end reads this JSON data and display it in the user friendly interface. Okay, here the JSON look like this. Once it is processed, we can show it in user interface like this. Okay, this is how API responses are working and what are these API responses we understood. We can go for next topic, why APIs are essential in generative AI. So this is one of the most important reasons to learn APIs today. So for example, modern AI applications rarely interact with AI models directly. But what they will do, instead they communicate with AI providers through APIs. Here AI providers means, for example, OpenAI. So OpenAI provides APIs to interact with LLM models like OpenAI, GPT 4.5 and all. These are the models like Gemini models by Google, then Cloud A. These are all AI providers which we can interact with the LLM models through APIs. So we can understand with the example. For example, this is a process flowchart. For example, suppose a user has summarized this document. If any application which is hosted using FastAPI which will interact with the model, right? How it will interact, we can see the flow here. So start user, the front end sends the request to you for the fast API backend. Then fast API backend forwards the prompt to the LLM API. Then the LLM process the request. Okay, once the request is processed, the generated response is returned to fast API. Then fast API sends the response back to the user. This is the complete process flowchart which is used or integrated with fast API and LLM. And so what is the applications of this is, this architecture is used in applications such as ChatGPT style chatbots, AI coding assistants, AI document summarizers, AI translators, AI resume builders, customer support bots. Okay, so like summary and key takeaways are same. So let's first key takeaway here is, so API definition. API stands for application programming interface. Next is secure communication. APIs allow application to communicate securely and efficiently. So REST APIs and HTTP methods, so they will provide get, post, put, delete. These are REST APIs use HTTP methods such as get, post, put and delete. Request and responses. You already know API requests are sent to endpoints and responses are typically returned in JSON format. Then Fast API framework. Fast API is a framework for building REST APIs. Then generative AI applications. Generative AI applications rely on APIs to communicate with large language models and other AI services. Learning foundation. Understanding APIs is the foundation for learning, backend development, fast API, and modern Gen AI systems. So, this is the end. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Don't forget to turn on notification so never miss the next episode of the Fast API for Generative AI series. See you in the next video. Happy learning.